moving from a sedentary to a physically active societal way of life. This is Up on Our Feet.
Welcome to Up on Our Feet. With our last few episodes, including a two-part mini-series on physical activity for children and youth in Finland, followed by an episode on the rates of physical activity for children and youth worldwide, we heard from Professors Arja Sakslahti and Timo Jaakkola, two researchers in the Faculty of Sport and Health Sciences at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, how Finnish culture places a very high value on physical activity for its children and youth, especially in the public schools. For example, at the primary or elementary school level, for every 45 minutes of academic time in the classroom, it's mandated that the students get 15 minutes of physical activity time outside. And they're even beginning to integrate physical activity into the academic classroom itself. However, as students move up into the secondary level, the lower secondary and upper secondary levels, there's less and less time in the curriculum for physical activity. And outside of school, recently, Finnish children and youth are engaged in physical activity even less. They're more sedentary than ever before. So this is a growing problem in Finland. In fact, 40% of the Finnish children and youth are physically unfit, and as one member of the Finnish parliament has said, this is a national concern. However, as we learned in our previous episode from Dr. Salome Aubert, a researcher at the Active Healthy Kids Global Alliance, this is a major concern not only for Finland, but in every country. It is a worldwide issue that has become a slow developing crisis over the past 4 or 5 decades, and it continues to get worse. So an important question, a serious question that must be asked is, what are the implications of all this if nothing changes, if this trend continues? And our guest is someone who has been following this trend for quite some time and has documented what some of the implications are. Jouni Välijärvi is an Emeritus Professor, also of the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, and the former director of the Finnish Institute for Educational Research at the university. Professor Välijärvi was also an associate of OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. OECD conducts research and publishes papers that inform the social and economic policies of nations worldwide. And Professor Välijärvi was also an education writer for the World Bank. Professor Välijärvi, it's nice to have you with us.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so you and I first met in 2012. We were introduced by our mutual friend Heikki Parkati in Finland, and we briefly talked about the issue of how important physical activity is, not only for the health and well-being of students, but as the research shows, their academic performance as well. And then once I got back to San Francisco, you and I exchanged emails. And what I'd like to do is read the email that you sent me, and that'll set us up for the interview we're about to do. Here's what you said. Even though we didn't have much time to talk, I found your topic most interesting and important, including for the future of the Finnish educational system. Some years ago, my colleague and I wrote an article for an OECD expert group about the future challenges of educational systems in highly developed countries. Then I realized that students' well-being in general and their physical well-being in particular might be the most important areas to develop if we want to prevent the increase of not only health and social problems of Western societies in the future, but also economic crises of these societies. So Professor Välijärvi, in that email, you said some years ago, and you and I met in 2012, so this means some years ago might have been 2007, 2008, 2009. Just when and how did you come to the realization about the importance of students' physical well-being and all its implications?
Yeah, actually it was because this is not my special topic. So earlier I was not so interested about physical education in my research and in my academic work. But this paper you mentioned, we were preparing that for OECD meeting in Finland. There's one very important civil servant retiring from the Ministry of Education, and OECD organized a seminar to honor his career, and they asked us to prepare a paper about the future of education and what are the main challenges of the education in Europe and globally in general. And then we realized with my colleague that there's a huge amount of new research where the physical activity of student is raised into the topic, because it was shown that if we don't do anything, we will see more and more problems with the health of young people, more and more diseases like diabetes. But what was still more important for me and maybe more alarming was that already on that time, there were findings that cognitive development and cognitive level of students and their physical activity are correlating with each other. So it seems that physical activity is also important for cognitive skills in individual level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned in that email that there are potential health and social problems and economic crises you see occurring if, as you say, quote unquote, students' well-being in general and their physical well-being in particular isn't addressed by the schools and societies. What are some of these health and social problems that you see and the economic crisis you see occurring if these issues aren't addressed by the schools and societies?
My understanding, the main challenge is that the roots of many diseases in adulthood are coming from a childhood. So if we don't do anything with the childhood development, it means that the risks which are based on too little physical activity are coming reality in adulthood, and when people are in later age, when they are 20, 25 or older, then it's too late to do changes in their behavior. That's why we have to understand that the basic reasons for growing number of diseases in countries like Finland and European countries. It's in the school age, and school is actually the only place where all children are, and that's why it's very important to have active schools which are trying to effect on all students, not only those who are at risk, but to raise discussion about how we can change the behavior of the whole cohort.
Okay, so then if the schools are so important in this, and obviously that's where the students spend most of their active day.
Yeah.
What are the future challenges for the educational systems in particular in addressing these issues? Because what we have found, and maybe you have found, there's a lot of resistance to increasing the amount of physical activity in the schools, because everybody, whether it's the math teachers, the language arts teachers, the science teachers, they want more and more for their academic subject, but this is not academic, or so some people think. What are the challenges that the schools are facing in being able to increase physical activity in the schools.
Yeah, that's true that teachers are competing of the active time of students all the time. All teachers say that they have too little time for teaching their subject. And that's why it's important first to understand that, that there exists a correlation between academic achievement and physical activity. Maybe that's the one point. The second is that schools and teachers should understand that they should work more together as schools, not as individual teachers, and develop school communities as real communities, not only as academic environment for individual students and individual teachers and individual subjects. So the collaboration and developing the cooperation inside schools, that's extremely important to raise the understanding why it's important. Maybe the third important challenge is to find ways how to help different kind of students to find the natural way for physical activity, because it's obvious that different students like different things, different physical activities, as also different kind of other activities. So to understand these individual differences and respect them, and try to reward students to be strong on that kind of activities which they find nice for themselves. Maybe this is really the difficult challenge to schools, where groups of students are in many cases quite big, and there are too little resources and so on. So it's not easy task, but I think that's the way we have to proceed to find understanding among growing generations to understand why physical activity is important for the rest of their lives.
Okay, so if you produce that paper for OECD, back in whatever year it was, 2008, 9, 10, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, and it was based on the research you saw then. And so that was, say, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, something like that. And there's even more, over the past 10, 12 years, there's been even more research. If educators are educated people with advanced degrees in higher education, why do you think there's resistance, or whatever you want to call it, in the schools to implementing the research? Why don't these educated people take the educated research and go, yes, we need to do this right now? What do you think is going on?
Well, it's very difficult question, but as I said earlier, schools are certain kind of communities. Actually, they are not real communities. They are there's a competition between the interest of students over time, and to understand that collaboration is the key for the future. It takes time, because the tradition is very individualistic, not only in Finland, but I think it's in all countries. And of course, we have to accept that every teacher thinks that my subject is the most important. But then how to proceed? That's a real challenge. But I think that, and also how to use research here, because it's not so obvious that teachers are aware of this. And as I said, 15 years ago, when I started to become interested in this topic, it was mainly a health challenge. how we can guarantee a better health level of young people in the future, and policymakers and researchers and some experts were very worried about the economical expenses in the future if we don't do anything. And I think nowadays we have much more research on the correlation between academic achievement and physical activity. For instance, how there are quite a lot of research on correlation between physical activity and mathematical skills, math skills, and that we convince teachers about this. It takes time, and it means that we, as a researchers, we have to be active to develop this kind of research information into the level that is understood better by teachers. But it takes time and a lot of resources, and maybe also on political level we need more activities to convince policymakers that mathematics and science and maybe language skills are not the only ones. And maybe are in the long run, maybe they are not the most important. It's the well-being of students. And I have noticed when I was working with PISA study more than 20 years.
Let me interject here. PISA, would you say what PISA is and how it's a program of OECD? Would you just say a word about PISA?
Yeah, and PISA actually it's comparing learning outcomes around the world. Originally, it was in OECD countries, and OECD countries, as you know, are the most developed countries in the world, around 35 countries nowadays. I think it started from that, but nowadays it's covering 60, 70 or even more countries.
And if I may, PISA stands for the Program for International Student Assessment. And as I understand it, OECD every 3 years evaluates the academic performance of 15-year-olds in all the participating countries in math, science, and reading, I think.
Reading, yes.
Right. Yeah. And then they publish those results.
Yeah, but nowadays it's more and more interesting and more focusing also the well-being of students, because there's a student questionnaire. It has been from the very beginning, and originally it was called background questionnaire, finding variables explaining differences in math, science, and reading skills. But nowadays these questionnaires are seen more and more as important findings as such, and well-being of students nowadays it's reported as one of the outcome of school systems all over the world, and it's compared in the same way as skills in mathematics, science, and reading. So it's only telling that it's that on that level, in global level, they are becoming more and more aware and convinced that well-being of students is becoming is extremely important for the future of for the young people, not only for the young people, but also for the countries and globally for the whole present modern way of life. And in that sense, it's very important change, because then it means that it's not something behind that's happening somewhere, but it's becoming into the focus that school systems can do something for the well-being of students, and it's seen very important, and physical activity is very much in the heart of the idea of what the well-being of students mean. Of course, it's broader, it's larger, phenomenon, but physical activity is one of the important parts of the well-being, and what it means in the future that on country level, policymakers and school administration are stressing the importance of well-being, including physical activity in national curricula and the work what schools are doing on daily basis. And in Finland, we can see every day that it's becoming more and more into the focus also in the general debate about the role of schools. Earlier, for instance, teachers said very easily that we don't have anything to do with or the well-being of students is not very much in our interest. It's the task of the health care system and outside the school. But nowadays, that's not anymore possible. If teachers say in that way, it raises quite a debate and understanding that it's something that happens at the same time. How students are behaving in daily life and how they are, what kind of results they are reaching in the academic side. They are connected to each other. They are two sides of the same phenomenon. And this has happened in last 20 years quite fast. And that's why I believe that in the future it's easier to convince policymakers and also teachers and schools that it's important to invest this. But it's also important to show all the time that this is an important task, and if we invest in the well-being and health and physical activity, we can see some results in the students' behavior.
Okay, so it sounds like what you're talking about is this is almost a paradigm shift that has to happen because, as you said, for decades, educators haven't thought of the physical realm of the student, the health and well-being of the student as being something that's a part of the educational system. And that isn't just true in Finland. I know it's true here in the United States. It's true worldwide. And so you're really talking about, or the question is, are you really talking about a paradigm shift that has to happen in order for the kids to not only be healthy and fit, but to perform better academically? Is that what this is all about?
Yeah, I would say that there's some kind of change taking place just now, and understanding that the students are something that people in general are individuals, but you can't separate them physical part and mental part or cognitive part and well-being of students. They are in everyday life, in school level, in classroom level, they are extremely strongly connected to each other. And students are taking their background and what happens at home and how active they have been physically. They are taking that every day into the classroom. And if they are not physically active, it means that they are tired, and it raises some other problems. And I believe that there's taking a change in the way of thinking, not only in among experts on this and researchers, but that's little by little taking place also in general level. And when we get teachers and especially parents to believe in this, to get them to understand why we are stressing this, it means that also the role of schools changes. And I believe changing. And one indicator is that OECD, that is originally and nowadays also, it's orienting to economical development of the countries. And now it's stressing in PISA and in some other studies the well-being of students, including physical activity. It's indicating that this change is taking place, and they understand the correlation between economical development in a very global level and what happens in the individual level and in schools. And we have to take students as a whole personalities, not something that we can divide. School does this, and medical system takes this, but they have to learn to work together, because this is also have been the problem traditionally, that experts in different parts of the society are not very well prepared to work together to help children and young people. They use different languages. Their traditions are very different, and it means that if students find and the families find some problems, it's not so easy to find help in society, because experts in different institutes speak very different language, and their culture is very different. And it means also that school and medical doctors and other experts, their strength is not that they are able to collaborate. It's more that they are specialized into certain area. And now I'm quite convinced that we are learning to understand this, and then also this physical activity is becoming one of the key issues in this discussion, because we see what happens actually on quite early age if students are not physically active. Diseases are becoming more typical and more earlier, and then economists, they understand that it's becoming also very expensive for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in a sense, tell me, if you would, it seems that you're saying that the schools, there are two issues here that have the same foundation. And that is, one, the schools need to see that because human beings, especially the kids in the schools, they are physical beings, they're mental beings, they're social, emotional, but they're all integrated into the child. It's all part of the child's makeup. And we have to address not only the academic, but the social, emotional, and the physical for the whole child. And the same metaphor of integrating is that this integration has to happen to improve the health, the academic performance, because that then impacts the social and economic structures of the cultures that these kids live in. Is that it?
Yeah, but I would like to stress especially that these are integrated to each other, and if we don't take care of all parts at the same time, if we forget some part or try to focus too much on some part, it means that we are trying to divide personality in that way that is not very natural. And especially if we are trying to do this with kids who are in problems because of family background, or if they have mental problems, or many cases the background is exactly the same because of social problems in families or with peers, then you have mental problems and so on. So if we don't take all these at the same time, and if the experts are not able to work together to understand why a child behaves in certain way that is not accepted, then it's almost impossible to change the behavior, because if experts don't speak the same language. It's impossible for a child or a family in social problems to understand what they are trying to say. One is saying that you have to do this and this. The other one is saying you have to do this and this. And then it's very confusing for a child and families and then it means that it's a real risk that the problems are becoming more and more severe. And then how I see it, I'm not expert here, but how I see it, the physical activity and physical level or how active and how good is your physical health. It's one of the basics, because many cases if the physical health is not good enough, it means that social and psychological problems are coming more and more serious, because it many cases means also that you have some problems with the other kids, and you are not able or you are unable to be with other kids. So your social skills are not developing very well. And I think it's quite typical. For instance, kids who have problems with their weight, if they are fat, as we say it, they are problems with other kids, and their behavior is becoming negative because of that. Basically, it's a social problem for them in many cases. They are bullied and so on.
Okay. Final question. You are highly regarded not only in Finland, but internationally. And with all the research studies you've conducted and all the papers and articles you've authored and co-authored in your many, many years of work, in the big picture of things, what's the big message, the big takeaway, the major conclusion you've come to from all your work?
Well, when I think of the schools, I would like to stress that as adults, we should be able to work together more productively. I lost the English word now, sorry about that, but anyway, that we should be able to work better together. And I think school it's quite a strange institute, that it's possible to work day to day, every day, for whole your career as an individual in community where students need support of different kind at the same time. And I think I would say that this is the most important, that we learn, especially in schools, but also in societies in general, to work more closely together and to understand how the world looks like from the point of view of children and young people, and what are the reasons behind their problems which we see in school, and learn to help them in the way that really helps to handle this kind of problems. And then it means also not only learning to work as communities, it means also learning to work together with families and parents, because many cases the problems are closely integrated into the situation of the families. But this is the main message, to understand, to see the world through the eyes of children and young people.
Okay. Emeritus Professor Jouni Välijärvi of the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, thanks for being with us on Up on Our Feet.
Thank you. This has been a great pleasure and honor to me.